Uzumaki Clan. This is Naruto's clan. Despite it being a powerful clan, known to have been distant cousins of the Senju and some of Konoha's greatest supporters, a clan so powerful that they had their own personal hidden village, there have been painfully few Uzumaki seen in the series. This is because the entire village was wiped out at some point in the past, right after Kushina traveled to Konoha, likely either toward the end of the Second Shinobi World War or the beginning of the Third. Having their clan be Order 66th, the remaining Uzumaki scattered to the wind, with the most notable members fleeing to Konoha, Ame, and Kusa. That being said, I can't help but wonder what would have happened had Karin and Naruto been raised together as siblings. Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, only 25% of our viewers are subscribed, so if you're a fan of the video, please like and double check if you are subscribed. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Ow, 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 ow! The feeling singed. It felt like being dipped into an acid bath. It was like his skin were melting right off. It felt like he was on fire. It was just a little alcohol on a cotton swab. Hold still, Naruto. It hurts though, he said. She pulled back for a moment and gave Naruto a deadpan stare. This was maintained until his inner fortitude broke down. He became submissive again. Upon seeing his soul defeated from the sudden glint in his eye, she went back to work. Cherry red hair, she looked just like her mother. The biggest difference between them, though, was the fact that she did wear glasses. She had what laymen called an astigmatism, and that required some glasses. Despite that, she was perhaps the most observant girl Naruto had ever met. She could almost always sense when something was wrong. She knew everything. He could not hide anything from her. "How did you get this cut on your cheek, Naruto?" she asked. "I accidentally ran into a swing set." She pulled back and gave him another deadpan stare. Naruto, defeated once again, looked away. "I got into a fight with Sasuke." Karin took a deep breath. "How many times do I have to tell you to leave that poor boy alone? Just because you have a crush on him doesn't give you the right to be a jerk, Karin. And just because you're an overprotective little brother doesn't give you the right to pick fights with him," she said. "I'm not a little brother, we're twins. Separated by a whole 15 minutes. 15 minutes younger, you're the little brother," she said. Naruto rolled his eyes. In truth, Naruto and Sasuke were both big personalities who tended to get on the worst side of the other, just two hurt children with nowhere to put their boundless energy and pain. And so they focused it on each other. It seemed funny that whenever the two seemed to be down, they went straight for the other to get into some knockdown dragout. The old therapy session for the male creature. When life gave you lemons, you beat the crap out of it. Despite their constant talk of hating each other, they seemed so much to enjoy fighting with each other, and sometimes seemed excited to see each other or disappointed when the other couldn't make it. It was almost kinda funny that way. Relationships, characteristics within the mind, all of these things seemed so ephemeral. There was a saying people said for when they tried to make out the logic of the happenings of the world. They often said, "Who can understand the mind of God?" And this was true. It was only further proven that man could never truly understand how God's mind worked, because they tended not to understand how even their own did. What Naruto saw as a negative relationship filled with hate, Karin could detect was actually somehow a minor bromance between them. Like night and day, they were polar opposite, yet completely complementary, and never seemed quite whole without the other. Just as light and dark were undefined without contrast, so too were Naruto and Sasuke undefined without contrast. The boy who had it all and lost it versus the boy who had nothing and continually tried and failed to gain it. Each of these marks the two left on each other were like little love letters between brothers. If she didn't know any better, she might assume they were brothers. Secretly, she'd seen how they acted. They fought each other, yes. They picked on each other, yes. But the moment someone else picked on the other, whether it be Sasuke or Naruto, their equal and opposite was quick to stand up and declare that the only person allowed to pick on them was themselves. It was adorable. But what was more, they seemed to remind her a lot of each other. Something Karin tended to notice in people was that someone tended to hate someone who displayed near identical traits to themselves. Maybe it was because the person became the embodiment of everything they disliked in themselves. Perhaps it was that the person felt like someone being exactly like them devalued them as a person. This was why people say that opposites attract, because alike people creeped each other out. But even then, that was a partly inaccurate saying. It simply was that one could not affix a stern shape to something so enigmatic and abstract as the human being. The greatest mystery in life was the self, and the moment someone declared that they knew themselves completely, they admitted they had lost. Irreplicable, unable to occur by chance, the human mentality and spirit transcended the natural world and spoke of something as hidden and mysterious as the concept of I. But look at Karin over here, contemplating the meaning of life and the relationship between two hearts. This was the blessing and curse of Karin. She was blessed and cursed with the glorious ability that some had tended to call the mind's eye of the Kagura. For reference, Kagura meant entertainment. This was so named because it sometimes seemed that Karin had the ability to see the very inner workings of the human being, something that celestial beings far higher with far greater understanding viewed. This balance with an above-average intelligence, not bragging, caused her to think too much about everything. The mystery of life opened itself up to her like a classic mystery novel that kept her turning the page day after day. Even such an event as a small fight at school left her contemplating the very inner machinations of a human being. How wondrous and mysterious, intriguing and enthralling. She admitted that she would never be able to understand the mind of the human. After all, if the mind of God was unknowable and man were made in his image, then man too must have an unknowable mind. But it didn't stop Karin from trying. Perhaps one day she'd become a psychologist. Her innate abilities seemed to push her in that direction. Her uncanny ability to read the deepest parts of a human being, their very soul, as well as her beautiful yet primal ability to heal led her to believe that her path in life was predetermined, and that she would enter some field to explore the hearts, minds, and bodies of those around her. Called to do good and to explore the wonderful worlds that existed inside of every being, true beauty called out to her. Something beyond the reflected light that her slightly malfunctioning eyes required a thick glass pane to understand. Still, Naruto was right. She did have a crush on Sasuke, and maybe to a point that caused her to favor him. That was another mystery of life, the mystery of love, of infatuation, why it began, why it persisted, why it sometimes died. Floating on the winds of fate, bound to the whims of the heart, it too remained something she never would be able to understand. But she admitted that she didn't need to understand it. She could dig into it, but she feared the old wives' tale that pointing at a rainbow could cause it to vanish. As strong and as fragile as the human heart, love was as contradictory as anything else called human, and Karin was content to simply bask in its light while it existed, not caring to know why it existed, only that it did and was shining upon her, enjoying it for however so long as it did last. Placing a bandage over her brother's cheek, she pat his head and offered his cheek a kiss. "No more fighting, okay?" she said as she stood and made her way to the kitchen. How unfair of a command, how utterly impossible. She knew he would continue to fight anyway. It was an unspoken rule that the inescapable was inescapable. But all the same, perhaps the command was a wish for him to try to explore a relationship with Sasuke that didn't involve blood and gore, but instead maybe the understanding of two completely separate boys who could attain brotherhood without the bond of blood. Perhaps the opening of a gate that would bring him into the clan. Karin began working on supper. Naruto sat on the couch, his fingers lightly tracing over the laceration on his discolored cheek, atop the bandage that went across it. As he did so, he seemed deep in thought. Karin didn't even need to look at him to guess something was up. "What are you thinking about, Naruto?" she asked. "I was thinking about us. Why are we alone?" "Because our parents died when we were born," she said. "But why did they die?" Karin shrugged. "From what Mr. Hiruzen told us, it was because of the Nine Tails." "The one inside of us?" Naruto asked. Truth was, Karin and Naruto already knew that the Nine Tails was sealed inside of them. Hiruzen didn't wish to tell them. In fact, he attempted to hide it from them. But Karin had the ability to detect a liar as soon as she saw one, and Hiruzen found himself unable to hide himself from her deep-peering inner eye. And so, this resulted in Karin detecting the truth. She and Naruto were the vessels of the nine-tailed demon fox. Its spirit split in two to ensure that it could not be whole. Yes, Naruto, the one in us. But how did it get out of our mother? Karin stopped for a moment and thought about it before going back to work, cooking up the rice. They say when a Jinchuriki's pregnant, the seal starts to waver. When giving birth, the chakra that's supposed to go into the seal goes to the baby. I assume that because they were surprised with two babies, the seal was strained too much and the Nine Tails got out. She was silent for a moment, feeling Naruto get a little tense. "Why do you ask?" she asked him. "Didn't they say that the reason why the Uchiha were all massacred was because they tried rising up against the leaf?" Karin recalled reading a news story about it. A couple years back, the Uchiha clan seemed to lose faith in Konoha and planned to betray them. This was caught early and the Anbu were sent in. During this, the few remaining Uchiha, as prideful as they were, felt it would be better for their clan to end rather than be disgraced and enslaved. So they proceeded to take their own lives, with only Sasuke surviving this due to being held back by Iruka. "And they tried rising up against the leaf because they were accused of unleashing the Nine Tails, right?" Naruto asked. Karin was growing more and more nervous the further down this line of thought Naruto was taking them. "It was disproven though," she said. "Yeah, but only after they all died. Meaning they all died for nothing. They didn't unleash the Nine Tails," Naruto said. "What are you saying, Naruto?" Karin asked. Naruto was silent for a moment. Are the Uchiha dead because of us? Karin stopped moving for a moment. She turned around and looked back at him. What do you mean? No, of course not. How could it be because of us? Naruto looked up, his face pale and his eyes watery. The Ninetales escaped our mother because we were born. If we hadn't been born, the Ninetales would have never gotten out, and the Uchiha wouldn't have been blamed. Sasuke wouldn't have lost his family. Karin walked over to Naruto and knelt down beside him. Naruto, are you okay? He shook his head. Today, I got in a fight with Sasuke. I didn't pick it, he did. And as we were reaching the end, he told me that his family was dead because of me. Karin was dumbfounded. Naruto, you know that's not true. But it is, he said as his tears started to roll down his cheek. Maybe that's the reason why Sasuke hates me. Maybe that's the reason he'll never date you. It's because he hates us for killing his family. She hugged her little brother. No, Naruto, that's not it and you know it. We didn't do anything wrong. For all we know, the Uchiha had been boiling on the concept of betraying Konoha for a while and only jumped at it because they were given an excuse. After all, Konoha eventually proved that it had nothing to do with the Uchiha. If they waited long enough, they would have been exonerated and would have likely received reparations for the slandering of their clan's name. But no, they had to attack Konoha. And after they'd been put down, it was their decision to end their own lives. Konoha didn't make them do that. They did so like some crazed cult. The Uchiha have always been messed up. This likely would have happened with or without us. You don't know that, Naruto said. You're right, she said. I don't know it, but I also know that it's just as possible as saying it wouldn't have happened. We don't know. But based on what I've read about the Uchiha, it would have happened. For a group that's so willing to throw away the lives of its own women and children over the failure to rebel, there was a deeper evil locked away in that clan. And I refuse to believe that it had anything to do with us. I refuse to let you or myself be blamed for the deaths of a clan because we were just born. We did nothing wrong, not a damn thing. We had no control over the situation, and those who did have control, they chose wrong. I lay the deaths of the Uchiha at the feet of the Uchiha and them alone. They overreacted. I refuse to accept responsibility for it. Naruto sat there, tears still running down his face. Karin ran her thumbs over the streaks. Be calm, Naruto. Your life is a gift to this world, not a curse. And anyone who dares to say otherwise doesn't know enough about the world to tell us. Don't let something Sasuke said in emotion get to you. I'm sure he doesn't blame you. People sometimes say things they don't mean when they get angry. No, Naruto said. People only say what they mean when they're angry. Karin thought about this, and to a point, Naruto was right. People always said that they say things they didn't mean when they're angry, and while this is true, people did often attempt to hurt the other by saying hurtful things they knew wasn't true. It was also true that the barrier that kept people from saying what was truly in their hearts was gone during a fit of emotion. Sometimes the thoughts people thought but never wished to say would spill out. Sasuke meant every one of those words. I might not be able to somehow sense the truth like you do, but I knew deep in my heart that he meant those words. He blames us. Karin pulled her brother into a hug. If he does, then he's a fool. Suddenly, their smoke alarm started going off. Oh crap! She turns around to see the rice now on fire. She reaches for an extinguisher and begins to put it out. Naruto, somewhat apathetic to the fire they almost had, simply asks why she used a fire extinguisher when she knows water-style jutsu. Karin looks back. Because it was a grease fire. Water and grease don't mix. Putting water on it would have just splashed flaming oil everywhere. Karin then puts the extinguished pan in the sink and runs water over it to cool it down. She opens a window, turns on a fan, and then begins waving a pillow in front of the smoke detector. As she did so, she would look to Naruto. What kind of ramen do you want today? The next day, they headed to the academy where they proceeded to have somewhat of a normal day. But as the time came to eat lunch, Karin would pass by Sasuke's table. She'd look over to him and he'd look at her. What? He asks with a tongue sharp enough that it felt like it could cut through steel. Karin wasn't intimidated. Did you tell my brother that it was his fault that your clan's dead? Maybe I did. What difference does it make to you? The difference is you made my brother very upset yesterday. I'm sorry about your clan, but we had nothing to do with that, Sasuke, and I'm not gonna stand here and let you blame my brother for it. You two can fight to your heart's content, but don't cross that line. He looked at her again. Cross what line? The truth? You two are the Ninetales, and it's because of the Ninetales being released, because of us being blamed, that my clan is dead. Karin slammed her hands down on the table and leaned over Sasuke. No, your clan is dead because you were a bunch of overdramatic babies who couldn't stand the fact that they were wrong. Neither I nor Naruto were the one that had your clan drinking the Kool-Aid, nor were we the ones that told them to attack the leaf. That was all your dumbass clan's fault. They're dead now because they chose to be. If you want to blame anyone for that, try laying it at the feet of the people actually responsible. Accept that your clan simply doesn't like to accept responsibility and be done with it. Sasuke was fuming. He stood up. You dare to impugn upon my clan's honor? She pushed him back down into the seat. I would if your clan had any. They got accused of something they didn't do. Whoop-de-doo. I get accused of stuff all the time. You don't see me trying to overthrow the government. I'm not trying to be insensitive, Sasuke, but you're not the only one who's ever felt pain. So either suck it up and deal with it or take it somewhere else. Some of us don't have time to be crybabies. That's easy for you to say. You've never experienced loss. Karin slapped him upside the face. Never experienced loss. We're orphans, the same as you, living with the demon literally everyone blames for it. We can't lose what we never had. At least you have fond memories to call back on. We have nothing but the bad times, the questions of what our family was actually like. You may have lost your family, but so did we. The difference was we're not blessed enough to know who they were, and instead are spit upon for merely being alive. By this time, Karin was attracting the full attention of the class. She was now leaning over Sasuke, who was still reeling. He hadn't expected a slap to the face, but Karin wasn't done yet. What happened to your clan was a tragedy, and I'm sorry about it, but don't you dare point your finger at us. The next time I hear you pointed your finger at my brother, blaming him for all your issues, I'm gonna rip it off and shove it up your— Miss Uzumaki, a voice said from behind. Karin turned around to see Irika had returned. What in the world are you doing? It's personal, Teach, she said. Personal or not, it's in the classroom, and we don't allow that here. Detention for the rest of the week. Karin looked back at Sasuke. She whispered in his ear, if you ever make my kid brother cry like that again, I'll make sure the next time we talk, I end up with an expulsion. She pulled back and looked down her nose at him. She then proceeded back to her chair. She sat down. The rest of the day, she remained there. As class let out, she and Naruto remained. He was told he didn't have to stay as he was not in detention, but he said he'd rather stay with his sister. Because they shared the same house together, an exception was made and Naruto was allowed to remain. Whether they were at home or not made no difference. They were gonna make the most of their time. They decided to do their homework, which they normally would do at home, wasting what little time off they had. Now, they might at least have more time to do what they wanted. I heard what the other kids said, Naruto said in a whisper. They said you're really laid into Sasuke, even slapped him around. Is that true? Karin nodded. Naruto sighed. You know I don't need anyone to defend me. I'm not a baby. I know you're not Naruto, but what he said to you affected me too. You're not the only one people blame for things. I was fighting for me as much as for you. You might have the right to tell me not to fight for you, but you don't have the right to tell me I can't fight for myself, she said. Naruto had to admit this was true. Still, if people think you fought for me, my reputation ends up damaged, and I'll gain notoriety as someone who's too weak to fight for themselves. Karin looked over. Sorry about that, but it sounds like overlap to me. We were both dishonored. You can't tell me not to do that. That's fair, I guess. But frankly, it surprised the crap out of me, Naruto said. I thought you were in love with Sasuke. Karin continued answering her questions. I am. Then how could you say those things to him? Do that stuff. Karin stopped the conversation for a moment to work on a particularly tricky math question. Once she had, she responded, just because I love someone doesn't mean I'm gonna let them abuse me, nor will I let them abuse you. I have boundaries and limits, and Sasuke crossed them. So I hammered his little ninja hands to make sure he did not do it again. I might seek a relationship with him, but I'm not willing to sacrifice all honor for him. He has to have mutual respect for me if any relationship we cultivate is to work out. Naruto nodded. I wish I could be as mature as you, he said. I don't know why I'm not. You are, Naruto, just in another way. Boys are different than girls. Boys always were and always will be simple, and that's fine. Sometimes the best answer is the simplest. You're still growing as a person, and to be frank, my actions today were not mature. You choosing to let it go and not continue the thought was pretty mature. But besides that, she looked over. Who dictates what or what isn't mature? And who balances that with liberty and free will? Perhaps Sasuke needed a wake-up call. Let history judge me. If Sasuke ends up hurt worse or helped by what I say to him today, then we'll know if it was childish or mature. Same for you, Naruto. So don't put stock in judging yourself by others' standards. Don't feel the need to conform to this world and its views. The truth was laid bare in her words. The world could not judge when the world didn't truly know. Standards might be set for what is right and what is wrong, but as people change, so do the views that they hold. What once was good is now not, and what was once wrong is now right. And just as the sands of time wore away that view, eventually the view held currently will be ousted for another modern view, and those who existed now will be retroactively judged. That's why Karin didn't put much stock into what people told her was childish or what was mature, what was morally correct and morally wrong, because in the end, those views changed. She couldn't live by the standards of others, only by the morals she decided for herself. What it really boiled down to was grit. The hills Karin and Naruto would have to choose would all have to be hills they were willing to die on. They needed to be sure of their decisions because in the end, what others thought of them mattered little. Their lives in the current moment were living proof of that. Living as outcasts and pariahs, Naruto and Karin couldn't depend upon the help and views of their fellow villager. They had a right to be alive too, and they weren't responsible for any horrible events that transpired in the past. Karin would not live chained and shackled to the whims of others. If she did that, surely she'd have died long ago, because that's what the world desired to see happen to her. what it desired to see happen to Naruto. Karin would not have this. She would persevere in the face of adversity, not give in to it. If the world wanted to cast her as a villain, then let them. From her point of view, they were the villains for treating her and her brother with such disrespect for no apparent reason. Karin sighed as she thought these things. Once more, this was the mystery of the human heart, the contradiction that existed in all beings, the desire to help people, the want to do good to them despite the resentment they held toward you, and the resentment that you held toward them. Humans tended to shy away from truly caring for each other unless it benefited them. After all, selfishness and prioritizing self-preservation was but a natural response. But all the same, the desire to help and to do good to others, that truly was proof of the supernatural. The concept that one could love those who hated them and could care about those that they resented in kind. Humans were walking contradictions and randomness given form. Orderly chaos that existed, sandwiched between two hemispheres and shelled in bone. What did it mean to be human? Was being human determined by genetics? Was it determined by physical form? Or was it determined by mentality, by imagination, soul? To be human was to transcend nature and not be possible to replicate. One could not teach a machine to think like a human, and one could not expect a human to think like a machine. Just as something in DNA separated man from animal, something in the soul separated man from machine. Humans were fundamentally different creatures entirely. Their desires and motivations, none could be predicted or explained, and that was exactly what made them so fascinating. It was part of the reason why Karin enjoyed this odd ability, jutsu, whatever you wanted to call it. It allowed her to explore the core of what was called a person, and even allowed her to explore the randomness in her own heart. The contradiction that she could love someone as much as she loved Sasuke, and yet turn around and slap his face, insult him, and tell him to watch himself. Sometimes she wondered if it was possible that love and hate were one and the same. One could not exist without the other to give it contrast. But it was also true that loved, when damaged or lost, evaporated into the hollow feeling of pain and sorrow, into hatred. Sasuke was a burning example of this. Resentment brought on by the loss of love. Every force in the universe had an equal and an opposite, but were those two forces mutually exclusive? No. Sometimes the borders of one were defined by the borders of the other. But more than that, it seemed almost that they were the same. If one were to think about the color black as nothing more than a shade of white, then does that not mean that hatred is just a shade of love? The number 0 is a number that signifies emptiness, but it's also the number directly before 1 and directly after -1. Numbers extend in both directions infinitely, and 0 is right in the middle. So might two dueling concepts work? These were the thoughts of a girl who was blissfully driving herself mad with the conundrum of humanity. For humans so smart and adamant that they could understand anything, it turned out that the only thing in the natural world the human mind couldn't figure out was the human mind itself. These things Karin thought about all through detention as she and Naruto proceeded to study. But unbeknownst to them, another story was unfolding in the village. As the sun slowly began to move past its center at the apex of the sky, another person entered. His hair was red, and his headband portrayed 4 vertical slits on it. About the same age as Naruto and Karin, this boy had eyes full of wonder and fascination, gazing out into the world with amazement just as the world gazed into his eyes with the same. The boy's name was Nagato Uzumaki, and he was a very special boy. This boy possessed the same eyes that once belonged to the Sage of 6 Paths. Having been born of a mother who fled Uzushio during its downfall, he now found himself here in Konoha. He did not yet know that he was far from the only Uzumaki to exist in this new village, to which he was an exchange student. As he moved forward, so too did the hands of fate, as they led the last 3 surviving members of the Uzumaki Clan toward each other. For better or worse, they would soon meet, and only time would tell what the implications of such a meeting would be. Uzushio 24 years ago. Kushina Uzumaki, a happy-go-lucky girl, felt as though nothing could go wrong. Running out of her home, there was a large field. That field had a hill with a large tree at the top, with multicolored flowers skirting the bottom of the hill like a hula dancer dancing under the radiant spotlight of the sun. It was currently 11:30 a.m., and Kushina had only now just eaten breakfast. On a nice summer day like this, sometimes it felt good to sleep in. There was no reason for her to get up early today. The village's academy was a little different from that of the other villages. Uzushio was a village that was fundamentally against sending their children to war, so summers were school-free, even during eras of war. Despite the desires of the first Hokage, even Konoha still sent children to fight in the various world wars it had seen, but not Uzushio. Uzushio had made it a point that no child would ever be forced to raise their hand in battle, not until a predetermined age that Uzushio had voted on and held as the law of their land. While other nations may force children to war, stealing the innocence of those too young to know any better and ruining the lives of the many warriors who, though honorable, were on opposing sides, who then had to live with the guilt of killing a child, living with the guilt of ending the lives of kids likely no older than their own children. Uzoshio would not. Such a thing was dishonorable, not only for their village, but to every other village, forcing their enemy to cut through their lines and lines full of children. No, Uzoshio was strong. They would not force their children to war. If they stood or fell, it would be upon the backs of the adults, whose only job was to protect the children. Uzoshio had even been trying to draft the bill dictating the rules of war, which would see the villages and nations making certain humanitarian agreements that would result in war becoming at least a bit less ugly. Such rules were full quarter to surrendering parties, protection of non-combatants, and a universal standard age for enlistment. Besides this, there were also a few more standards that dictated what jutsu should or shouldn't be used in battle due to the cruel nature of them. This was to be known as the Whirlpool Accords, and Uzoshio had been pushing for it for years now. No other nations had signed it, not until a few days ago. Konoha, Uzoshio's greatest ally, despite itself being in the middle of a terrible war, had finally signed. Despite the first Hokage's will matching that of Uzoshio Gakure's, it had been like pulling teeth to get the village he once held control over to agree to the accords. And perhaps it had forced Uzoshio into a position that they did not wish to be in, forcing them to do something that they didn't want to do. Kushina was running up that hill. As the world fell apart on Uzoshio, there was some peace that could be found within this small field. There was no war in Kushina's backyard, and that made her pleased. It allowed her to continue enjoying her life the same as she always had. Her and her mother and her sister. Running to the tree at the top of the hill, she saw a piece of paper held down by a stone. Kushina picked it up and began to read it. Finally out of bed, sleepyhead? Good. Well, now it's time to get even. Last time when we played hide and seek, I found you but could never catch up. Today, I'm gonna settle the score. It's your turn to seek. Don't leave me waiting too long now. Kushina smiled as she read the paper. She began rushing out into the nearby woods. Ready or not, here I come, she shouted as the standard signal to inform her sister that the game had begun. She began to run within the forest, between the trees and over the stones. She crossed the creek and went deeper still, reaching the center of the holt. She looked around. She began to close her eyes and mold chakra. A common skill that was taught by Uzoshio Gakure in their academy was chakra sense. The very first things that were taught to children who likely would become prospective shinobi was survival skills, and that included how to survive in a forest by themselves. Beyond that, there was first aid and finally chakra sense. This, Kushina had always felt she excelled at. It at some times seemed as though she could sense chakra without even molding chakra. She felt as though she might be able to read minds with the level of chakra sense that she possessed. Even the academy was astonished at her level of advancement in this particular skill. They believed her to eventually become the head of the intelligence command in Uzoshio, as she could seemingly smell a lie. And right now she was using that ability. There were many chakras around, most of them animal. The thing was, there was one chakra that was stuck in cautious mode. It was waiting, watching. It had to be her. Kushina smiled and ran straight in that direction. Once she reached it, she began running up a tree. Suddenly, the one she was tracking began to run off. No fair, you're cheating. It's not cheating, Kushina called out. This is me being myself. I can't help if I'm just naturally good at tracking. The girl she was chasing let out a huff. Fine, if that's how you want it, don't forget that I've always been stronger and faster than you. The girl really poured on the speed. Kushina began working as hard as she could just to keep up, and despite that, it seemed like her sister was not even at her full speed yet. The balances were always askew when it came to certain traits. Some had said that if Kushina and her twin sister were born as a single person, they would have been the single greatest shinobi that Uzoshio had ever seen. Fuso, slow down, I'm not that fast. Fuso looked back and laughed. What was that you said? It's not cheating, this is me being myself. If you won't nerf yourself for me, then what makes you think I'd nerf myself for you? She let out a laugh and continued going. Fuso, ugh. Fuso immediately put on the brakes to see Kushina miss a branch. She was now hanging on for dear life. Fuso, help me, I'm slipping, Kushina said. No, you're not. You're just trying to trick me to make me come back to help you so you can win. Fuso! Suddenly, Kushina's grip failed and she fell to the ground below. Fuso hopped back to the tree limb and looked down on Kushina as she laid there. You think I'm that gullible? I know you're not as nimble as me, but even you can handle a fall like that. There was no response. Quit playing games, Kushina, it's not gonna work. Not this time. Kushina didn't move. She just laid there on the ground, unmoving. Kushina, come on now, get up. You're freaking me out. This isn't funny. Kushina remained there, motionless. Fuso felt her heart jump to her throat as the many what-ifs flooded her mind. Possibilities such as she hit her head on a rock or something when she fell, or possibly landed wrong and broke her neck. She came down beside her. Kushina? Kushina! She walked over to her and knelt down. She knew that she couldn't move Kushina. If she had broken something, that would be the worst thing she could do. She checked her pulse for a heartbeat. There was one. Suddenly, Kushina's hand raised and gripped Fuso's, causing the girl to recoil with a start. Kushina opened her eyes and smiled. Gotcha! Fuso's eyes widened in shock and then anger. You cheated, she shouted. It's not my fault you're gullible, Fuso. The girl's face began to turn red as her hair. Excuse me for thinking that your life was worth more than a silly game. Kushina sat up. Alright, that's fair. I won't count this time. Get back into the trees and we'll continue where we left off. I don't know if I want to play anymore. You scared me and you did it on purpose. That was mean. Kushina stood and hugged her sister. You're right. I'm sorry. That was too far. I won't do it again. Fuso stood there still trying to fume. Kushina then spoke as she hugged her. I'm grateful to have a sister who will sacrifice even her pride to make sure I'm okay. And at that, Fuso's heart melted. She took a deep breath in and heaved it out. Fine. I suppose one more time won't hurt. Kushina let her go. In exchange for my screw up, I'll let you have a head start. Fuso got back into position as Kushina got back on the same limb she was on before. On your mark, get set. Before they could continue, a voice called out to them from the edge of the forest. Girls, come back! It was their mother. Looks like we are done playing, Kushina said as she looked back. Fuso scoffed. I still have a score to settle. As soon as we figure out what Mom wants, I'm smoking you. And this time, no more dirty tricks. Together, they began to make their way back to their home. Coming into the clearing, they passed over the hill and began to head back to the small house where they lived. They entered the door. Mom, we're back. What do you need? They walked into the living room to see their mother sitting with two men wearing the Uzoshio-gakure symbol on their forehead protectors. What's going on? Fuso asked. Their mother seemed a little upset. Girls, sit down, please. The girls, now on high alert, took a seat. One of the men turned to face them. Are these the girls? The mother nodded. Which one is which? Their mother pointed to each of them. The girl on the left is Fuso, and the girl on the right is Kushina. The man knelt down in front of them. My, what beautiful girls you are. It's a pleasure to meet you. I am Naito, a Tokubetsu Jonin under the Aishina II, Chief of Foreign Affairs. What do you want with us? Fuso asked. Naito continued. We're here to choose one of you for a very special role. What do you mean? Kushina asked. We're children. Naito nodded. Indeed, but there is a role that we need one of you for. Naito turned to Kushina. Kushina, you have been chosen to be the next Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails in Konoha. Kushina was confused. Huh? Naito began to explain. A Jinchuriki is a human who... No, I know about that, but why do you need me? She asked. It's because you have abilities no other Uzumaki has displayed. The ability to sense emotions and chakra. This ability is believed to make you worthy of becoming the perfect Jinchuriki that was foretold at the foundation of this village. Kushina was confused and yet somehow intrigued. So you'll seal this Nine Tails into me? We won't, Naito said. What does that mean? Fuso asked. Kushina, you are going to be sent to Konoha to live. There they will seal the Nine Tails away inside of you. Kushina was shocked. She began to panic. Wait, you mean I'll have to leave my mom and sister? Naito nodded. You don't know how important this is for the village, Kushina. For years, Uzoshio has been trying to pass international laws, limiting the cruelty of war, bringing civility to battle, and saving untold numbers of lives. Nobody would sign it until a few days ago. Konoha signed the treaty, but they asked one thing in return. You. Why me? Kushina demanded. Because they believe you to be the perfect Jinchuriki that was spoken of in times past, and we have to agree. You can't send her, Fuso stated with boldness. It's against the law. You can't enlist a child. You think we're idiots? Konoha is signing the treaty, but only if you allow them to break it? Impossible. Naito looked down. We thought of that already. Konoha has informed us that they won't make Kushina a member of active service until 6 years pass, when she'll be of legal age according to the Whirlpool conventions. The reason why they want her now and why we're allowing this is because turning one into a Jinchuriki at a young age leaves them flexible. The older they are, the more rigid the Jinchuriki. The younger, the better. The less developed a child is, the more the connection between them and their tailed beast grows. They wish to seal it into her while she's still primed for her position as a perfect Jinchuriki. Then they'll train her to use its power. Naito then drew closer to Kushina. He took her hands and held them. Kushina, I know it's scary, but Konoha has promised to treat you like a princess. You'll be given the best the village has to offer, and you'll be treated kindly with respect." "But what about my family?" she asked, tears starting to well up in her eyes. "I don't think I have the strength to leave them. To say goodbye to my mom and sister forever? I don't think I can do that." Naito looked down. "Kushina, I know you're scared, but you're stronger than you know. The village is asking you to make a sacrifice for the greater good. Doing this for the village, it will save many lives. If Konoha follows through with the accords, the rest of the world will have no choice but to follow suit. Konoha is sitting at the world table and has decided to take the left napkin. The rest of the world will have no choice but to take that left napkin as well, or risk disrupting the peace that has only recently been won. I don't know if you've heard, but the Second Shinobi World War is over, and now is the perfect time to draft this bill. If the world agrees, then war will fundamentally change forever, will become more humane, and will see the protection of innocence. Please, Kushina, think about what the world stands to gain if you make a small sacrifice, please." Kushina looked to her mother, who waited patiently for her answer with a look of sorrow upon her face. But she powered into a smile to tell Kushina that no matter what she chose, it was okay. Kushina then looked to Fuso, who seemed confused that Kushina would even consider this at all. Fuso shook her head as if to tell Kushina no. Kushina then looked down at Naito, who was still pleading with her to accept this new role. This was the first time that a decision for Kushina's future was left to her to decide. Worse still, it was more than just a decision that affected her. It was a decision that affected the entire world. Turning her gaze back to Naito, she asked, "Can you promise me that you'll always take care of my mother and sister for the rest of their lives?" Naito nodded. "Yes. Uzoshio will gladly take care of their needs. They'll never worry for finances or anything, and will have access to whatever they need without exception." Kushina gulped and took a deep breath to gather willpower. She then forced the words out of her mouth. "I'll do it." "Kushina, no!" Fuso demanded. "You can't do this." Kushina looked to her. "This'll be good for you. You won't worry for anything, ever." "But that's not what I care about. I don't care about money or anything. I just want you." She hugged Kushina. Kushina listened as Fuso cried on her shoulder. She pat her back. "It's okay, Fuso, but I'm not doing this just for you and Mom. I'm doing this for Uzoshio. I'm doing this for the world." Both girls were crying now. Even their mother was crying. Naito stood and looked at his compatriot. "Come, let's give them a moment alone." After the family had finished grieving for the future, Kushina was sent to a room to collect the things that she needed. She then went to join the two Jonin. Naito put his hand on her shoulder. "It's gonna be okay, Kushina. Third Hokage Hiruzen has promised to put you up in the Hokage's residence. He's a very kind and generous man, one of the kindest men you'll ever meet. He'll treat you like a man would his granddaughter. You'll be cared for." Kushina nodded. She then said goodbye to her family and began to walk off. Fuso and her mother stood there and watched. Fuso couldn't grasp it. Why did the world require Kushina of all people? Her mother attributed it to destiny, to a grand plan, written for her before the day her soul was even sculpted by the father himself. While none of them were excited about this plan for her life, it didn't stop that it was coming. "We just gotta have faith that this is for the best," her mother said. "Somehow this will work out for the better." Such a concept she held, but even Fuso herself began to wonder how it could work for the better when their little village was surrounded by the enemy, as their very way of life was being crushed, as her mother's life slipped away from her in Fuso's arms. Fuso wondered how this was for the best when everyone they loved was dying. Fuso, being ever so quick and nimble, fled to the forest, outrunning any shinobi that had come after her. She left Uzoshio Gakure forever as the village fell to the hands of shinobi without forehead protectors. She began to flee. She wanted to leave it all behind. Uzoshio, Konoha, everything. In the span of a few months, her happy life was ruined because of war, the threat of it, and the attempted prevention of it. She didn't stop moving, didn't stop walking, didn't stop heading west until eventually the weather began to mirror her constant mood. Nothing but rain for days, weeks even. A sunny day seemed as rare here as a rainy day in Suna. As for Kushina, she had been spending her time in Konoha, saddened as well. First, because she had to leave her family behind, and second, because she knew that her clan had fallen with her village of origin. That, coupled with the terror of having to take a demonic entity into her, seemed so much. She had Mito to guide her, though, which brought her some peace. Mito knew what the girl had lost, and what she had yet to sacrifice. She knew that Kushina really just needed a win, so she gave her a secret. The way to control the Ninetales was through love. She should consider searching for suitors, which she did eventually in Minato Namikaze, who would go on to become Hokage. Kushina would take in the Ninetales, becoming its Jinchuriki, though it was discovered after this that her trauma continued to follow her, which made it impossible for her to be the perfect Jinchuriki that they had spoken of. That likely had been a factor in the escape of the Ninetales during the birth of Karin and Naruto. It was after this that the world began to show hatred toward Karin and Naruto, due to the trauma they had all felt from the escape of the Ninetales, an event that left the village shredded. Naruto and Karin, now being blamed for the event in general, were left to pick up the pieces of their life, as Konoha gradually began to forget about their sacrifice. That wasn't the only thing Konoha forgot though. An investigation was launched into the destruction of Uzushiogakure. As it turned out, there were many reasons why Uzushiogakure had fallen. One was because of the threat of the perfect Jinchuriki, which they believed could destroy the current world order, and it also had to do with the Whirlpool Accords. The world knew that they couldn't take that left napkin, knowing that doing so would severely limit their options, which would make smaller and weaker nations eventually subservient to Konoha, so they opted to destroy Uzushio and the Accords to keep from falling under Konoha's thumb. Without Uzushio, the villages just continued what they were doing. Konoha, after seeing this as well, would themselves abandon the Accords and act as if they never happened, knowing that they could not allow themselves to be handicapped while the other nations were not. Due to discovering the truth of who was behind the attacks on Uzushio, they planned to take their vengeance out on them, which led to the beginning of the Third Shinobi World War. But this is not where the story ends for our heroes. No, you see, we still need to follow Fuso. Fuso, now living as a refugee in Amagakure, would end up living on the streets as a child, going hungry. That was until a boy found her. His name was Issei, and he was the son of a prominent physician. After finding her, he petitioned his father to help. Considering that it was a doctor's duty to ensure that anyone and everyone was well cared for physically, Fuso was taken in and nursed back to health. And considering her history, the fact that she had nowhere else to go, and due to the fact that Ame hadn't spared any money to feed or care for orphans, they decided just to care for her, because Issei's father could not in good consciousness send a girl he just nursed back to health back out into the cruel world, where the same thing would happen for another time. They decided to allow her to live with them, but as times changed and years passed, Issei began studying to follow in his father's footsteps, becoming a physician himself. However, he refused to enlist in Ame's shinobi forces. He could not after his father, who had cared for them both his entire life, was killed in action fighting in the Third Shinobi World War. No, Issei dedicated his life to the preservation of lives, not the taking of them. He chose to instead join a humanitarian organization called Medical Nin Without Borders, which would send aid to other small villages that had been devastated due to the war. It was during this time that Fuso grew pregnant with her and Issei's first child. Giving birth to him, they named him Nagato, after Issei's father. But they quickly came to learn that the boy was different from other children. He possessed ringed eyes. Having him checked out by physicians, hoping they could determine what this all meant, it was revealed that their son might be the fulfillment of a different prophecy that stated that the one bearing the eyes of the Sage of Six Paths would come to set up a new world order of either peace or destruction. Due to this, Fuso and Issei were provided for, and everything was offered to them to help the development of the child. However, one might have been able to take the animal out of the wild, but never could they take the wild out of the animal. Fuso and Issei, stubborn and dutiful as they were, continued to work humanitarian, oftentimes using some of the funds that Ame allotted to them to help with their efforts to aid villages that had gone through devastating attacks from larger nations, something Fuso felt very passionate about due to her own experiences. Sadly, they stuck their heads in too deep and ended up being caught up in a raid on a village, and during this raid they were killed, leaving their toddler son alone. But this was not the end for Nagato. Amagakure would officially take up the child themselves and put him into the household of Hanzo the Salamander until such a time as the old lizard died. It was a day unexpected and sudden. The poison sac he had implanted into himself ruptured and poisoned him. He would eventually be replaced. Nagato lived a life of plenty and was treated with respect as if he were king. He'd also be trained and allowed personal tutors to help him grow as a shinobi. By this time, the Third Shinobi World War had drawn to a close, and Konoha was in good standing with Ame. So Ame decided that the best way to help Nagato grow would be to send him there as an exchange student. And that is exactly what they did. Nagato packed up his bags and was sent off to Konoha to learn. He arrived in the village a little after noon. He looked around and was astonished. There was nary a cloud in the sky. No, they basked in the sunlight all day, every day. It blew his mind. As he passed into the village, he kept the bangs of his hair forward to slightly conceal his Rinnegan in hopes of not drawing unwanted attention. "Wait up, young Master Nagato!" shouted two others behind him. He looked back and saw a man and woman running his way, two of the most powerful shinobi ever to be brought up in Amagakure. loyal to their village yet pacifistic. Never before had they killed. Even when they had gone to war for the village during the Third Shinobi World War, they did everything in their power not to kill. This seemed impossible, but the completion of this feat required them to be strong, which is how they became elite. It also served as proof that they were worthy of their task. They were the personal guards of Nagato. Their names were Yahiko and Konin, both in their early 30s. They caught up with him. What will the Amekage think if we lose the second sage of Six Paths? Nagato offered a slight bow. My apologies. I didn't mean to frighten you, I merely got excited is all. Konin, catching her breath, let out a sigh. It's okay, just try and stick with us. We'll be sure to visit all the places you're interested in later, but first we need to visit the Hokage. He's graciously accepted you into this village as a student. We ought to go pay him a visit and speak with him about the exchange. Nagato nodded. The woman took up the young man's hand and the trio began to make their way to the Hokage's office. Upon hearing that Nagato had arrived, the secretary informed the Hokage and then cleared his entire evening just in case the meeting spilled over. They opened the door and stepped inside. Hiruzen was sitting at the table. He stood up and walked around it. With a slight clap of his hands, he smiled. Welcome, honored guests. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. He stepped forward. I assume you are the emissaries of Amegakure, Master Yahiko and Mistress Konin. They nodded and Yahiko spoke. You seem well acquainted with us. If so, then I assume we have no need to introduce young Master Nagato here. Hiruzen nodded. He took Nagato's hand and kissed it. Welcome, sage, he said. He led them deeper into his office. You are free to sit anywhere you please. Hiruzen then sat down in his seat. Nagato sat down and Yahiko hovered above him. Konin sat on the other side. Hiruzen then began to speak. It's an honor for Konoha to host the esteemed second sage of Six Paths. It's our hope that we might educate him and help him grow into a powerful shinobi, so he might eventually bring the world to peace. Konin bowed her head slightly in respect to the Hokage. Ame is pleased to be able to share this with you, Lord Third, with you and your wonderful village. After all, it's believed that this is the land where the first sage, Hagoromo, settled and began the very first school of Ninshu. It's our deepest desire that by tracing the steps of the previous sage, that Master Nagato might gain an understanding of the things that made the first sage of Six Paths so great. All the while they were talking, Nagato was no longer paying attention. He couldn't help that he had the attention span of a koi fish. He was too busy playing with the obi of his kimono. He looked at it. For as long as he could remember, this had been the style of his formal wear. It made him feel a bit embarrassed walking around so fancifully, but it was what was demanded of him, a white kimono. Around the collar, there were black magatama lining it. On the back, there was a pattern of 9 magatama in a 3x3 row, just under a ringed circle that Nagato could only assume represented his Rinnegan. Nagato had been taught the history of the Sage of Six Paths, how after banishing the evil rabbit goddess, the sage set about spreading chakra and ninjutsu to the rest of the world, believing that they could use it to grow closer and protect each other, only for it to be developed into a weapon that the world would use to destroy itself. They had told Nagato that he was destined to change this, and instate a brand new world order where things could no longer occur like this. But to be perfectly honest, Nagato was not sure how to go about doing this. Despite being so young, he was actually far from being ignorant. Whether it was by benefit of his tutoring or perhaps just a natural gift bestowed upon him by his Rinnegan was unknown, but he was smart enough to see the world for what it truly was, and he just saw a world where war was natural. The world wasn't something he could just change. Even if he was some sage of six paths like Hagoromo, he was still just a human being, and that meant he had limits. His Rinnegan had limits. He had already known that it wasn't impossible for him to bring someone who died back to life, but doing such a feat in earnest, by which I mean actually bringing the dead back to life, as in restoring their soul to their body, was something that did have a cost. A life for a life. If he restored someone who had died, he himself would die. There were limits. There were prices to pay. Nagato might have had access to certain jutsu that others did not, some that might be considered by others miracles, but Nagato knew he was not a god. He was still just a regular human being born with a Kekkei Genkai that had not been seen for generations. So how was he supposed to change the world? How was he supposed to stop war? Everyone blamed the war for utilizing the sages' ninjutsu as weapons against each other, but the thing is, ninjutsu was a tool. It was a tool to make life easier, to connect with others, yes, but the very fact that one could summon lightning and fire and control the elements, well, that made it perfect for war. The sage had made every man the master of all elements, and because of this, wars could be fought. And why shouldn't they? What was the practical use for calling down lightning? What was the practical use of fire-style jutsu so large it could burn down forests? It was the Sage of Six Paths that had set the world on a collision course with war. It was all well and good that people could sense each other, but was the sage really going to expect human beings to be responsible with this power? Humans were weak, and when they didn't get what they wanted or something was done to them, they would shed blood over it. Such a thing was normal, common even. And even if the sage had not given the rest of humanity chakra, it would have still gone to war. As long as humans had the means to harm each other, they would. That was a basic law of humanity, of society as a whole. It was something that Nagato didn't think could be removed from the world. How was he supposed to bring peace? People far greater and far smarter than he had tried for generations to bring peace and had failed. What was it that Nagato was going to do any differently? His Rinnegan couldn't just magically solve any problem, he had limits. Suddenly, Nagato was elbowed in the shoulder. Huh? He looked up. Yahiko looked down at him. Lord Hiruzen asked you a question, Nagato. Nagato looked back at Hiruzen and offered a slight bow. My apologies, Lord Third. I was in my own head and missed your question. Hiruzen smiled. It's perfectly all right. I was merely asking you if you wanted to perhaps join in on the academy tomorrow. It would be the last day of the school week. You could just sit out and wait until this Monday if you'd prefer, but I assumed you might want the option. Nagato thought about it for a moment. I will be attending this Monday, correct? Hiruzen nodded. Indeed. Nagato thought about it. Yes, I would like to join in tomorrow so I can begin getting settled and getting to know the other students. Eager to make friends, Hiruzen said. That's perfect. I will inform the schoolmaster of your imminent arrival and attendance tomorrow. For now, we've allotted you and your guardians a home. It was once owned by the first Hokage before he had the estate built. It has since been heavily renovated to serve as the guest house for honored visitors such as yourselves. Feel free to make yourselves at home. If there's anything you need that we can provide, do not hesitate to reach out. Your hospitality is highly appreciated, Konan said as she stood. Nagato followed suit. Standing, he looked at the older man through his crimson bangs. Hiruzen smiled at him, which caused Nagato to do the same. Naruto and Karin woke up. Karin was always the first one awake. Despite being roughly the same age, she was the one who was taking on the responsibilities. Her mother had left a large hole, and that hole demanded to be filled. So Karin filled it. She let Naruto sleep in an extra 30 minutes while she made breakfast. After that, she would wake Naruto up and the two would share a nice breakfast together. Karin then demanded to be the first in the bathroom, which Naruto couldn't deny. Karin demanded reparation. There was still some child left in her. After this, they began to make their way to school. The day before had been hard, and today it would be hard as well. They still had 6 days of detention owed to the academy. This in particular was not just because she threatened another student or because she disobeyed the teacher, but this was for striking another student. And while kids would be kids, they needed to know that hitting another person without reason was not okay. But considering that they were training children to be weapons of war, she began to question what was considered reasonable. To be frank though, Karin was not in the mood to dive deeply into the inner machinations of the human mind today. She just wasn't in a good mood, and it had caused her to lose sleep the night before. They both filed into the classroom. They were a little late, but not enough to be tardy. By the looks of things though, on the outside of the academy, something big was happening. There was press and paparazzi. Is that him? They asked as they started taking pictures of Karin. Oh, no, never mind. What's their deal? Karin asked as she got inside. Naruto shrugged. I don't know. Maybe the Hokage's coming to pay a visit? They entered the classroom and took their seats. As they did so, they passed by Sasuke, who was attempting to avoid eye contact with the both of them. Taking their seat, they didn't have to wait long until Irika came in. There was a commotion outside, but Karin couldn't see what it was. Irika was standing at the door. This was all very strange. What was going on here? A few minutes later, the door opened. 2 adults walked in, one male with orange hair and another female with blue hair. Not long after, a boy in a well-to-do kimono walked in. He possessed red hair and pale skin. Karin sat forward when she saw it. Something seemed familiar about this boy. Who was he? As the boy stepped in, Irika spoke with the adult standing above the boy. They spoke with Irika, joked, laughed a bit, and then departed, leaving the boy alone with Irika. The boy stood there for a moment as Irika prepared to address the students. All that fuss for one boy? Naruto asked. Who is he? Why does everyone want to take his picture? Irika then spoke. Class, we have a very special student joining us today. I hope you'll make him feel comfortable. Irika then turned to the boy. He spoke in a way that the class couldn't hear him, but Karin read his lips. He was asking if the boy would like to be introduced or if he'd like to introduce himself. The boy chose the latter. He stepped forward. Hi, I'm an exchange student from Amagakure. Some have called me the second sage of 6 paths, but I'd prefer to be called a friend. My name is Nagato. Nagato Uzumaki. The class began to clamor over the concept of sharing their school days with the second sage of six paths, but it held all the more meaning for Karin and Naruto, who both looked to each other with surprise. Nagato Uzumaki? They watched as the boy stood there. He was waiting for the class to settle down before making his way up, afraid that he might be overtaken and washed away by their waves of excitement. Irika managed to get a handle on his class, as was his job. Settle down, class, settle down. As he managed to quiet them, he continued. While it certainly is very exciting to have the next Sage of Six Paths here in class with us, it's also important to remember what he's here for. He's here to learn just the same as the rest of us, so please try to treat him as any other student. Don't make a big deal about it, harass or distract him from his studies. He then allowed Nagato to take a seat. Nagato found one in the back of the class, away from the other kids' attention. As he settled down, Karin couldn't help but watch him. Naruto then spoke. Wow, his clan name is also Uzumaki. Crazy coincidence, right? Karin, still watching Nagato, replied, yeah, coincidence. Nagato's birth was one believed to bring peace to the world. As the next Sage of Six Paths, all believed him to be able to bring the world into peace. But unbeknownst to the rest of the world, at that very moment, another story was unfolding. Another prophecy. Another Sage of Six Paths. The location was the moon. In a manor just a bit away from the rest of civilization, as the echoes of distant explosions, battle cries, and the ugly sounds of war could be heard, the sound of a child's birth, a woman's travail, and baby's cries rung out. The father, wringing his hands as he walked back and forth, sweat with fear. Yes, perhaps the physicians were the best of all within this rock that held the statue from their ancient past, the progenitor of their people, but fear remained. What if the child is sick? What if the mother doesn't stop bleeding? The natural fears of such an event. This man was not the first to think these thoughts, and he was far from the last. So long as life continued to be born into this world, these thoughts would naturally follow. But what had shaken the manor to its core was not the event of stillbirth, nor the tragedy of a mother's lost life. No, the wonder was when the child opened its eyes. Crystal blue, the irises bearing what appeared to be a flowing, undulating, spinning lotus. These eyes bore the same shape as the Tenseigan vessel that Hamada had given to his people after his death. Hamada, being one of two Sages of Six Paths at the time, possessed special eyes, ones he seldom showed any. Awakened after the defeat of his mother, Hamada used them to open a portal to the moon where he and his kind stood custodian of this world and the one of Hagoromo. But as the tides of time washed and eroded away the sands of his body, Hamada's time eventually came. And so he allowed upon his death for his Tenseigan to be taken and stored inside of a vessel of his own making that bore the name of his dojutsu. With each passing generation, the dead offered up their Byakugan to this vessel, and with each new pair of eyes, the Tenseigan grew stronger and stronger. Wars began to be waged over the meaning of Hamada's will, and so many had been lost. A tragedy felt on both sides. But looking upon the eyes of the child, the screams and cries of battle hushed. Hamada himself, seeing the troubles of his people, had seemingly returned once again to them in an effort to clarify his will. What was the will of this child? As the judge of his own clan, what would he decide? What did the world deserve? The various world wars fought on its surface, the misuse of chakra, what would the judgment be? As the child grew, knowledge was forced into his head, wisdom was seated at an early stage, and the moment he could make a decision, he would. What is the verdict, Sage of Six Paths? The people of the Lunar Kingdom cried to their new master. The boy, who after birth had been given the name Toneri due to him being the new head of the House of the Otsutsuki, would be left to judge and decide what the will of Hamada was concerning the earth. Toneri, looking out to the little blue orb as it hovered in the sky above them, sat for a time in quiet contemplation. His crystal eyes awakening from meditation, he spoke. The judgment is death. The week had been mostly quiet for Karin and Naruto. They observed Nagato from a distance. Neither of them quite had the guts to speak to him yet. Uzumaki, he looks so much like us. Well, so much like you, Naruto said as his gaze jumped between Karin and Nagato. The boy, amazingly, was able to maintain his peace throughout the various school days. He was, of course, very popular, but whether by the threat of the school or perhaps simply because his novelty wore off very quickly, he was attending school like a normal kid now. His school clothes had changed. He was now wearing the same type of open-toed shoes as the rest of them, as well as a black jumper where both the shirt and shorts were connected without seam, as if they were a single piece. It was nearly a week since he had joined class. Naruto and Karin seemed to be the only children left to think about him. You'd think we should introduce ourselves? Naruto asked. Karin waved it off. Just because he's a member of the same clan as us doesn't exactly make him a true blood relative. He's from the village hidden in the rain. That's a totally different village. And besides, there's not many Uzumaki left. Whether he's a direct blood relative or not, I'm just glad that we have another family connection at all. Karin stood there. She thought about it and tried to read the boy's chakra, but it was fundamentally different from every other chakra she had ever felt. She couldn't explain it. There was a serenity about the boy, like he was born from nature itself. As they spoke, he was just sitting under a tree, various animals coming to him. There was a type of natural sense to his chakra. Karin hadn't experienced it before, but she wondered if it could be a sage power. Sage what? Naruto asked. Sage power, Naruto. Just like they described about Hashirama Senju, how he could use the energy of nature to awaken his sage mode, which gifted him with the strength of nature. Naruto gasped. "Oh, I forgot that's what it was called," he said. He seemed slightly embarrassed that he forgot such an important part of Hashirama's history. Disregarding this, he returned to the topic at hand. Nagato. Guess there's only one way to find out if he's really using sage power. Hey, Naga! Karin would quickly cover his mouth to stop him. Thankfully, Nagato didn't seem to hear him. Karin held Naruto's mouth shut until he started licking the palm of her hand. Ew! She pulled her hand back and shook it out. What's wrong with you? Naruto looked at her. Listen, we're not gonna learn anything by sitting here. I don't think he seems so special. Sure, he had weird eyes, but Sasuke has weird eyes too, and I don't see the world fawning over him. Let's just go over and check it out. What's the worst thing that could happen? Karin was wiping her hand off on her shorts and side-eyeing Naruto in a way that her expression told him that she was skeptical but curious. Naruto took that as an okay and walked on over. Hello, he said with the widest grin. Nagato looked over and saw the biggest set of teeth he had ever looked at. It tickled him pink. He let out a giggle. Hello. Naruto then asked if he could sit down too. Nagato smiled. By all means, please sit. Naruto sat down. So, me and my sister were talking, and he pointed back at her. Nagato looked and smiled at her. Karin freaked out and hid behind a tree. Don't mind her, I think she's intimidated by your weird eyes. Nagato's expression showed a bit of shock and comedy. Never heard my Rinnegan described like that before, but please, continue. Naruto began to speak. Is it true that you're a member of the Uzumaki Clan? Nagato nodded. Yes, I'm a member on my mother's side. Naruto smiled. That's awesome. Me and Karin are too. Nagato looked over. Wait, you two are Uzumaki? Naruto nodded. Yep, our mother moved here from Uzoshiogakure when she was really little. She was brought to be the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, but sadly she passed away when giving birth to us, and the Nine Tails had to be sealed into both me and Karin. Nagato sat there for a moment. Wait, did you say that your mother was the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails? Naruto nodded. Nagato thought back about it. I seem to have heard that somewhere before. I recall someone telling me something about that, but I can't remember what. Nagato was silent for a moment as he racked his brain, searching for the answers he was looking for. He looked to Naruto with a smile. Well, either way, it's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto. Please send your sister my regards. Tell her I don't bite and would like to meet her too next time. Naruto smiled. Will do. The school day came to an end. Nagato headed home with his guardians, Yahiko and Konin. Once they got home, Nagato washed up and waited by the table for supper to be brought in. He and Yahiko were sitting there while Konin was putting the finishing touches on it. Yahiko was currently reading through the newspaper for any possible news regarding the current state of the world, as well as their home village, Ame. Looks like another day of nothing at all, Yahiko said. Well, no news is good news, Konin said from the other room. Nagato sat there thinking deeply. Yahiko peeked over the top of the paper for a moment. Something up, Nagato? You haven't spoken much since we came home. Is something the matter? Nagato looked up. Huh? Oh, no. I'm just racking my brain. I'm trying to remember something someone told me about the Nine Tails Jinchuriki, but I can't remember. Yahiko put the paper down. Oh, if that's all, why not ask me? You know? Nagato asked. Yahiko nodded. Yeah, I was informed about all the known information about you when we were announced as your guardians. Could you tell me about it then? Nagato asked. Where do I begin? Yahiko asked as he thought about it. The Nine Tails Jinchuriki was chosen from the Uzumaki Clan as part of some deal that would add new rules to the way wars are fought, he said. After the end of the Second Shinobi World War, the village hidden by whirling tides came up with a plan to keep children out of war and outlaw certain ninjutsu of certain classes that could be considered cruel and inhumane. They also wanted to add certain protection laws for non-combatants and surrendering shinobi, but in the end, that resulted in the destruction of Uzoshiogakure and the eventual demise of the Uzumaki Clan. This led to the Third Shinobi World War. The Nine Tails Jinchuriki was an exchange between Konoha and Uzoshio to seal the pact Konoha had with the village. In exchange for getting the quote-unquote perfect Jinchuriki, they'd be the first to sign these accords, and the rest of the world would soon have to follow suit. Or that was the plan. I already told you how that ended. Yes, but who was this Jinchuriki? Nagato asked. Yahiko looked at him curiously. Why do you ask? Because I met her children today. 2 kids, a boy and a girl named Naruto and Karin. I was trying to figure out if they were related to me somehow. Yahiko began racking his brain. I can't remember that. I know that there was something to do with it in your file, but I can't remember. Hey, Conan! She popped her head around the corner. What is it? Do you happen to know anything about the connection Nagato has with Konoha's Nine-Tails Jinchuriki? Of course, Conan said. She was your aunt. Wait, what? Nagato exclaimed. Conan then continued. She was your aunt. She and your mother grew up together until she had to be taken away to become the perfect Jinchuriki for Konoha. Not long after, your mother had to flee Uzoshiogakure, where she settled in Ame and married a physician. You were born not long after. Nagato stood up. Those kids I met today, they were my cousins. Conan entered the room. You met the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki's children today? Nagato nodded. Yes, they were wondering if I was somehow connected to them through the clan. Conan thought about it for a moment. Well, I suppose it isn't unlikely. After all, this was the village where she settled. I heard she had died though. She did. She died in childbirth, Nagato said. I have family here. I need to go tell them. Conan laughed and held out her hand. Slow down, Nogs. You still have 1 more day of school this week. You can tell them tomorrow. For now, eat some dinner and get some rest. Nagato tried to do that. The issue was he couldn't bring himself to sleep until very late due to his own excitement. Nagato the next morning would begin to make his way to the school. Getting there, he would make a beeline straight for Naruto and Karin. They'd be sitting at their desks. What's up, Nagato? Naruto asked. Nagato could barely contain his giggles. Guess what? What? Naruto asked, curious as to what Nagato could be so excited about. I went home last night and I asked about your mother. I wanted to know more about her. As it turns out, your mom and my mom were sisters. Karin's eyes went so wide that they looked like they might just fall out of her head. Naruto was still processing it. Wait, does that mean? Nagato began running in place. He was so excited. It means we're cousins. Naruto got up out of the seat as fast as he could, hugged Nagato, and the two began jumping in excitement. Nagato reached out his hand for Karin. Karin began to cry, making Naruto and Nagato's expression change to a more serious tone. What's wrong, Karin? Nagato asked. She stood and hugged him, planting her face into his shoulder. I am so happy. We were so alone. Nagato's heart immediately shattered. His excitement turned to near tears themselves as he realized how starved for a family bond she was. You'll never be alone again. I won't let you, he said as his hug intensified. Naruto walked over and hugged them too. By this time, they were already the center of attention in class. Everyone was looking now. That was until Iriko walked in and demanded that they all sit down and turn their attention toward the lessons he had planned for them. Nagato decided to sit with Naruto and Karin today. They planted in between them so they could both have the chance to sit next to their newly discovered cousin. As the day came to an end, Nagato had a little free time, so he decided to stick with Naruto and Karin for a while. He would give Conan and Yahiko a call to tell them where he was and what he'd be doing, and they gave him the stamp of approval with the appeal for him to be safe, which he told them he would do. As they walked to Naruto and Karin's apartment, Nagato spoke. So, what's it like being the village's perfect Jinchuriki? Not as great as you would think, Karin said. Nagato was a bit confused, but as he walked with them, he couldn't help but notice that Naruto and Karin were both getting side-eyed. Karin seemed most caught by this, as while walking, she pulled her arms into a fold and scrunched her neck down as if she were battling bitter cold. She could read the negative emotions of these people, and she had to face it every day. Naruto put his arm around her shoulders as her support. He obviously didn't feel it or didn't let it bother him, but it bothered Nagato. It bothered him a lot. Why was the village treating them this way? As they made it to their apartment, he walked in with them and looked around. It was a small apartment with only 1 bedroom, 1 bath, and a small kitchen toward the entrance. Nagato walked a little deeper into their living room and looked around. It was slightly messy, but looked as if someone were at least trying to keep it tidy. This is a nice apartment, he said, being kind. He looked back. I would offer your guardians my compliments, but it seems they must be out to the market. What guardians? Naruto asked. Nagato's eyes widened. Wait, you don't have parental guardians? Naruto shook his head. Nope, it's just me and her, he said, pointing toward Karin. Nagato began to slightly grit his teeth, though his expression remained neutral. He tried to push it from his mind. Well, who cooks the food? Karin raised her hand. What are you planning to eat today? Nagato asked. I think we still have some ramen left in the cabinet. I might have eaten that last night, Naruto said with a chuckle. Naruto, that was our supper. Karin walked over to the cabin and opened it up. There were no more cups of ramen, only a couple of cans of sardines. Karin sighed. Guess sardines will be our supper tonight. Why don't you just buy more ramen? Or better yet, go out to a nice restaurant, Nagato asked. We don't have the money to. Every month, Hiruzen sends us our allowance. It's supposed to be enough to carry us through the month, but as of late, with all the growth of Naruto's appetite, it's becoming harder and harder to stretch it. After all, a growing boy's gotta eat. Nagato picked up the phone. He began dialing a number. The phone rang for a moment until someone picked up on the other end. "Hi, Yahiko. I have a question. Can I bring my cousins home tonight for a sleepover? Can you make enough to feed them, too?" He waited a moment as the voice on the other end mumbled a bit. The voice then gave an approval. "Good. I'll be home soon." He then looked to Naruto and Karin. "Pack up a few things you might need tonight. We're gonna party at my house." Naruto and Karin looked to each other. Karin then spoke. "We wouldn't want to put you and your guardians out or anything." Nagato laughed. "Don't worry about that. We're all good." Karin looked at Naruto once more, who mouthed the words, "Can we please?" to her. She looked to Nagato, who had taken a page from Naruto's book and was now all teeth. She relented. "Only if it's not any trouble for you or your guardians." Nagato pulled the chain, pumping his fist in excitement. "Yes, I have so many things cooking in my brain. We're gonna have so much fun." Nagato and the Uzumaki twins began making their way back to Nagato's house. Entering, Naruto and Karin couldn't help but look at the inside with awe. "No way! You're staying at the Senju house?" Naruto shouted out in excitement. Karin looked over. "The what?" Nagato touched his nose. "You know your stuff, Naruto. This is indeed the home of the first Hokage, Hashirama Senju." Karin was confused, but Naruto explained it to her. "I'm a bit of a Hashirama Senju buff. He's my favorite Hokage. His abilities and powers, I particularly loved learning about his wood release. Did you know that he's the only known user to naturally achieve it? Nobody knows where it came from or why it disappeared, only that he..." Naruto began to ramble on, causing Karin and Nagato to slightly zone out. As Naruto came to the end of his long spiel, Nagato smiled. "That's so cool, Naruto. You'll have to tell me more about it later. I'm gonna go see if dinner's ready," he said. Nagato then began to rush off toward the kitchen. Karin stood there patiently. Naruto began walking around the foyer. After a few moments passed, Yahiko entered the room with Nagato. He stepped forward and extended his hand out to the two. "It's an honor to have you in the household with us." "The honor's all ours, Mr. Yahiko. Just Yahiko. You can drop the mister. Makes me feel old." Yahiko led them deeper into the home where they found the dining room. They sat there by the table and waited. "So what's it like living here in Konoha?" Yahiko asked. "Boring," Karin said. "Very boring," Naruto tagged on. "We would much rather hear about what Ame's like," Karin said. "Is it true that it rains every day?" Naruto asked. Yahiko gave off a laugh. "Not exactly. It doesn't rain all day every day there, it just on most occasions. It's more often rainy than sunny, which is how it got its name, but it does still have some clear days. They're more far and few between." For a while there, they talked about their different villages and about past experiences and histories before eventually the conversation evolved into Fuso and Kushina's history. This lasted until supper was ready. The plates would be brought to them. After supper, Nagato wanted to spend some time playing games. He had so many fun ideas about what they could do. Naruto and Karin obliged and began playing along. Some were simple, some were complicated, but all were fun. As the night wore on, it became increasingly obvious that sleep would soon overtake them, and so they each took their turns cleaning up before bed. Yahiko and Konan would roll out a couple extra futons for Naruto and Karin to sleep on. As they all said goodnight, Nagato, Naruto, and Karin all tried their best to stay up, laughing and talking and playing about until the siren song of sleep grew too much for them to handle. That night was one of the best nights Naruto and Karin had ever had. It seemed that nothing could spoil it. The day began, and they were just as happy as they were the night before. Then they turned on the TV. It showed a live video of the moon as the news anchor spoke. The moon was an unnaturally large size, and debris seemed to be circling it like a fine cloud of dust. "Scientists have still yet to determine the cause of this, but one thing is certain. The world will never be the same." It then changed to a scientist speaking as he had a blackboard with various formulas and diagrams drawn on it, which he was using to help him explain. "The moon is growing closer at an alarming rate. Many are asking if the moon will crash down on us, and the answer is a resounding no. We're not at risk of a total collision with the moon, per se, but what we're seeing at current is the sudden altering of tides. Tides are becoming more and more extreme, which isn't much of an issue for us here in Konoha, but in coastal areas, particularly in places like the village hidden in the mist, as well as the land of waves, evacuations are already underway, as the tides will soon reach the point of flooding these areas. Besides that, our days and nights are going to be rapidly decreasing in length of time. We currently have a 24-hour day period, but by the end of this scenario, we could be looking at days as short as 6 to 12 hours long. Now, once the moon reaches a certain distance from us, it will likely begin to break apart under the stress of our gravity. That distance currently sits at roughly about 11,500 miles from Earth. Once it passes by that barrier, the moon will begin to disintegrate into smaller pieces until all that is left is a sea of meteorites. That likely sounds far better to you than your previous conceptions, but the difference is like choosing between taking a cannonball to the chest and taking a shotgun blast point blank.
Our planet won't be destroyed by any means, but life on it, well, that could very well end, at least as we know it. Depending on when the moon begins to break apart, we could see major powers such as the Land of Fire being reduced to a molten landscape. And if the fragments of the moon do not disintegrate into very small chunks, we could see extinction-level meteorites landing in different locations around the world. That's the current worst-case scenario. But if we're blessed enough to only receive small meteorites, we might be able to survive the initial impacts. The casualties would be great, but mankind would survive. It then switched back to the anchor. What would the world look like after that? The scientist then flipped the chalkboard to show something else. After this, should we survive, we would see a complete shift in the ecosystem, particularly in regards to tide and nocturnal animals. The tides would only be at about 1/3 what they normally would be, and animals that hunt at night, such as owls, would have a hard time adapting to the total lack of light. This means entire species of predatory animals will slowly begin to die off, as their prey, such as rodents, will begin to multiply out of control, bringing with them disease. The spin and tilt of the Earth would also shift variably, resulting in summers that last for decades, or sudden onslaughts of winter that could occur over the course of a couple weeks before returning to an intense summer. The northern and southern poles of our planets could see an increase in daylight where normally they get little, and due to that, the ice caps would begin to melt. Besides that, weather such as typhoons and hurricanes will spawn more often and be far more deadly. This will no doubt lead to the end of life on Earth. What has caused the moon to do this? The anchor asked. The scientist began to take off his glasses. There is no known cause. We have no explanation. The moon was, for a time, slowly drifting away from us, but now it's drawing closer, and we have no explanation as to why. The anchor spoke again. Let me then ask the question on everyone's mind. Is there hope that humanity will still exist in the coming days? The scientist nodded. Of course, there's always hope that we might continue to exist. The cards are stacking against us, it seems, but there is the chance that we could adapt to it. It will be a trial unlike any we've ever faced, and there's a very good chance that many of us will not survive without proper care. If you live near water, it's suggested that you evacuate. Be sure to have as much food and water as you can. National emergency stores are opened, and every citizen of the Land of Fire is guaranteed to get enough to keep them going for at least a year. The only thing we can do now is pray. Naruto, Karin, and Nagato watched with widened eyes. They could hardly believe what was going on. Is it the end of the world? Naruto asked. Yahiko remained silent as the news switched to a live stream of the moon. As they switched channels, almost every news channel showed it, and every non-news channel redirected to one of the more major news ones. Emergency alerts began to play all throughout the day, informing citizens to head to the nearest shelters not to be struck by the falling debris and to limit the damage done to society as a whole. An air of dread fell over the planet as the night skies were filled with the reminder that judgment was well on its way. School was cancelled, and the entire Hidden Leaf village began heading for the root base under the nearest mountain. As Nagato, Naruto, and Karin continued to watch the broadcasts, suddenly there was a new broadcast played. Whether it had been received by the stations and played on all channels and frequencies, or if perhaps the radio and television stations had been hijacked was unknown, but an image of a boy likely no older than 12 was shown. He had deeply pale skin and was wearing a lightly colored kimono. He began to address the world. People of Earth, my name is Toneri of the Uzumaki Clan, and I am the Sage of Six Paths. My people currently reside upon the celestial body you call the moon. For 1,000 years, we've watched your society grow, stagnate, and regress, and have determined that you do not deserve the chakra and world that you've been given. We are here to cleanse this world of your presence and start anew in accordance with a revered ancestor, Hamada Otsutsuki. You are to reap what you sow, and what you have planted is death. The harvest is come, and the reapers are ripe to pull in the harvest. Take solace in knowing that there is nothing you can do. Pray for peace and forgiveness now, for I will send you to he who formed you. The video then ended. After this, a single broadcast for the news was played across all stations as they began to pick apart what this could mean. They often replayed the speech and rehashed its meaning. Yahiko and Konan looked at each other in confusion. Wait, Nagato, I thought you were the Sage of Six Paths, Karin said. I did too, Yahiko said. I did too. Yahiko then began to explain. No, history tells us that there were two sages, Hagoromo and Hamada. Hagoromo is the Sage of Six Paths that we know, but his brother possessed similar powers. For some reason though, he decided to live on the moon, leaving the rest of the world behind. A few of his descendants remained, and they're what formed the Hyuga clan, but I don't understand. Hamada never would have wanted this. What could cause this? Nagato stood. I don't know, but I need to stop it. Konan walked over and put her hands on his shoulders. No, Nagato, you're too young. Even if you're the next Sage of Six Paths, you're not ready. Nagato shook his head.
No, this is what I was born to do. I'm supposed to make this world a better place, and I can't do it if there's no world left to save. Even if we did let you do this though, there's no way for you to get to the moon, Nagato, Yahiko said. I think it's best if we wait it out. If humanity survives, they'll need a leader, and that leader will be you. Nagato shook his head. No, that boy on the television says that he's going to destroy the world. If the moon falling is a purposeful action, then there's no doubt that he'll not allow it to end with the survival of the human race. If I do nothing, we all die. This is my only chance. We have to go to the moon. How would you even get there? Yahiko asked. Karin raised her hand. They all looked to her. You said that they left behind a branch of their clan that became the Hyuga. If there is a way to get to the moon, surely they'd know. Nagato looked to Konan and Yahiko. Please, this is what I'm meant to do. Let me at least try. Yahiko and Konan looked at each other and nodded. The group would then pack up their gear and head toward the Hyuga compound. There, Nagato would meet with Hiyashi Hyuga and the Elder, who had yet to evacuate to the shelter. Excuse me, but we would like to talk with you, great elders of the Hyuga clan, Nagato said with kindness. Yahiko and Konan elected to stay quiet and allow Nagato to take the lead. This was what he was trained and born to do. What can we help you with? Hiyashi asked. I would like to know if there's any way to get to the moon. Hiyashi sighed. We may be connected to Hamada like this Moon Clan, but we don't have any knowledge that might help you. We simply do not know how they got to the moon in the first place. Possibly some space-time jutsu that's been lost to time. Regardless, even if we did, there's no guarantee that you could even make it to this lunar sage of six paths. There has to be something, Karin said. Anything at all. Old legends, children's stories, anything. You Hyuga are meticulous in recording the history of your clan. There's gotta be something. Hiyashi sat there for a moment and then shook his head. I'm sorry. I don't... Hiyashi trailed off. It was then that the elder spoke up. I might have something. He stood and walked to the bookcase. He would then pull a book. He began looking through it. I'm trying to see if I can find it, he said. He looked back. There was an old story that was told to me when I was but a child, back when the first Hokage was still in office. Much of the Hyuga clan's family history predating the Warring States period had been lost, but there was a story that had been passed down orally from generation to generation, something we were told almost every night. I was looking to see if it was written down anywhere, but I can at least give you the gist. The story was about a boy who dreamed to go to the moon. It was said that he was easily overwhelmed by the people of the world and sought peace. So he went to the moon to find a place to be alone, but upon making it there, he found it lonely and he missed the earth. It only now occurs to me the story might have been about Hamura, but anyway, as the legend goes, he found the place where the eye of the moon gazed through the heart of man and entered the cave where he proceeded to fall down to the moon's surface. Fall down? Konan asked. The elder nodded. That's how the story goes. I suspect he meant that there was a hidden gateway to the moon, but how to get there is left up to interpretation. Actually, it might not be, Hiyashi stated. He pulled out a map and laid it down on the table. This is a more modern map, and it has unparalleled accuracy. He began to look it over. There, he pointed at a small lake. It was shaped like a heart. This is near the area where Hagoromo was said to have settled down. If Hamada truly was the inspiration for that story, then this is where he would go. Nagato looked at it. Then that's where we ought to go. Thank you so much, honored elders of the Hyuga. And so they traveled all the way to the location on the map. Once they got there, they were met with an odd stony outcropping. As the moon moved through the skies, it almost seemed to perfectly line up with this outcropping, making it appear as though the moon were the pupil of an eye gazing down at them. At the base of this stone was a cave opening, and inside they found a hole. As they fell, they saw various bubbles that played out moments of their lives. It seemed that at this moment, everyone but Nagato had fallen asleep here. Nagato, however, for some reason was perfectly fine. He would eventually go over to them and attempt to wake them up by means of releasing them from genjutsu. Once this was done, they traveled out and realized that they were on the moon. We must get closer, Konan said. The only way to stop Toneri is by getting to him. He should be within the castle at the center. And so, through sneakery and trickery, they managed to get inside of the castle. Once they were there, they began to seek Toneri out. When they got to the door of the throne room, Nagato held out his hand. You all must remain behind, he said. I alone can face Toneri. No way, Yahiko said. We're not going to allow you to face this alone. Nagato looked back. Guys, I love you too much. We're going to be facing a user of the six paths. These techniques are too much for a regular shinobi to handle. We'll have you though, Konan said. Nagato nodded. True, but the moment I start fighting, reinforcements are going to be pouring in. I can't fight Toneri and all of those shinobi at once. I'm going to need you all to buy me some time. Naruto and Karin nodded. Nagato smiled. I'll see you soon. He then opened the door and stepped in. Nagato began walking toward the throne as Toneri watched. He would summon the guards when he didn't recognize Nagato. Nagato would stand there silently. "I commend you on finding your way up here, Earthling," Toneri said, "but there's nothing you can do to stop it." Nagato would pull something from his pocket. It was a hair tie. He would run his hands through his hair and take up most of it into his grip before tying it off. He would then open his eyes and look directly into Toneri's. "Those eyes," Toneri said in awe. "Are those?" Nagato nodded. "I am the Earth's Sage of Six Paths. Nagato, I bear the eyes of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, brother of Hamada. I am the latest descendant in his line, and the opposite to you, your distant cousin." Toneri stood from his throne and began making his way down. He circled around Nagato. "Interesting. You have a pale complexion like an Otsutsuki, but your hair is far removed from anything seen on the moon. Something outlandish, even by Earthling standards." "We don't have to fight, Toneri," Nagato said. "We can talk this out. You and I both know that this is not the will of Hagoromo, nor Hamada. They were seekers of peace, not judges." "What do you think I seek now?" Toneri said. "The only way peace on Earth will ever exist is if there are no people left on it to war." "That sounds like a very empty peace," Nagato said. "What are you fighting for, Toneri? The people or the flowers?" Toneri stood there for a moment. "I'm fighting for a world inherited by the truly worthy." Nagato scoffed. "I saw many things on my way to this castle. Among the many things I witnessed were the ruins of many battlefields. Did your clan also war? Did you also misuse chakra like you accuse us of doing?" Toneri had no answer. "By your own judgments, your people deserve to be destroyed. If I were the kind to judge as you are, I would say the moon should be destroyed simply because of the people who live thereon. But I'm not going to judge you or your people because your people deserve to live. And so do ours. Rescind your judgment on my people and I will rescind my own on yours." "And what if I don't?" Toneri asks. "Then you'll give me no choice but to kill you." Toneri grits his teeth a little. "Never did I expect the brothers Otsutsuki to fight. Never did I expect one who claims to be Hamada reincarnated to so quickly turn on the ideals he held." Toneri then walked back toward his throne and turned around, holding his hands out as if to present the situation in full to Nagato. "Then I guess we have reached an impasse." "No," Nagato said. "We reached a breaking point." He raised his hand and utilized the Diva Path to push Nagato into the throne behind him. Toneri smashed through the throne and lay there for a second. He then stood. "You're not the only one with tricks," he said. He then held out his hand and utilized a form of the Diva Path himself. Nagato raised his hands to use his own version of the Diva Path a second time to clash, but it was obvious that Toneri's version was superior. Nagato was thrown back. Hitting the wall, he peeled himself from it before suddenly switching to the Ashura path to fire missiles. Toneri would suddenly clap his hands together and imbue the power of life into the ground, causing the ground to give birth to golems that rose to defend their master. They took the missiles head on and began to rush at Nagato. Nagato, in fear, would then use the Naraka path to call up the King of Hell and use its powers to strip the life straight from the golems. "Is that all you have?" Nagato asked. Toneri stood there looking at him. "No." He would suddenly cover himself with a Saiyan chakra cloak and rush at Nagato. Uh-oh. Outside, various puppets and guards were rushing Naruto, Karin, Konan, and Yahiko. "We gotta do something or we're gonna get overwhelmed," Yahiko shouted. Naruto looked at Karin, who gave him back the same stare. "Konan, Yahiko," Karin shouted. "I know it's a lot to ask, but can you buy us some time?" Yahiko looked back. "No, we can't," he shouted. Konan released a flurry of paper bombs in the form of butterflies. "But we'll do it anyway," she shouted. Naruto and Karin sat down. They gripped each other's hands and began to meditate. "Our mother was the perfect Jinchuriki," Karin said. "Maybe we have that same potential." They would enter their subconscious after some difficulty and would find Kurama, who would offer to help them only for now, declaring that he could not let the earth and life on it that he depended on to fade away. And so, begrudgingly, he offered them his chakra. Together they would meld their chakras together to form a completed Kurama chakra avatar, which would begin to shatter the castle to pieces. Kurama would reach out and sweep the area clean of those who would do them and Nagato harm. Elsewhere, Nagato would be struck by Toneri's attack and also sent to the surface. Toneri would hover there with his truth-seeking orbs hovering behind him. "For one who possesses the supposedly most exalted dojutsu of them all, you're painfully lacking with it." Nagato rose to his feet. "Toneri, you have to stop this. This isn't what Hamura would want." "And how do you know what Hamura would want?" "You can't. Only I can, and I've already made my final judgment." Toneri flew down and struck Nagato again, sending him flying a good ways away. At about that moment, Naruto and Karin were finishing up with the golems. Seeing Nagato being tossed, they'd both be gifted with just enough energy by Kurama. Kurama would see Nagato and would remember Hagoromo, and for the sake of him and the sake of the world, he would gift Naruto and Karin with the chakra they required. They would take on a chakra cloak of their own. They would rush off to fight Toneri as well, smashing him into the ground. Toneri would pull out of the ground and change his focus to them, striking out as they attacked him. He easily matched the two of them, as not only was he physically stronger, but he possessed a higher form of taijutsu. "Nagato!" Konan and Yahiko cried. "You have to get up!" Nagato slowly began to rise to his feet. "Guys, I'm sorry. I don't know how to defeat him." "Don't give up," a voice said. Suddenly, Nagato was in a dark space. Where was he? He looked up, and there hovered the Sage of Six Paths. "Don't give up, my descendant. You awakened the Rinnegan for a reason, and that reason is to bring peace to both Earth and to Toneri." "But how do I do that?" he asked. Suddenly, another voice chimed in. "You must teach him what was truly my will all along." "And what was your will?" Nagato asked Hamada. Hamada smiled. "My will was to safeguard the Earth and ensure peace was upon it. Peace for all people. It was our desire to protect the Earth from the threat of the Ten Tails, but it seems that Toneri has forgotten that. The connection to the Ten Saigon is what's allowing Toneri to move the moon. I will grant you a bit of my chakra. Seek out the vessel and destroy it. Doing so will stop the moon from drawing closer. When you do so, find my Ten Saigon and bring them to Toneri. I will tell him personally of my will." Suddenly, Nagato awakened. He felt a new power rush through him. He began to rise into the air as the Truth Seeker orbs formed around him. He then flew deeper into the moon. He followed his heart, and it led him to a temple. There he entered and found the Ten Saigon vessel floating. Looking at it, he found it beautiful, a living relic of Hamada. It was sad that it must be destroyed, but this was for the best. Nagato would smash the vessel with all of his might, freeing generation upon generation of Byakugan. But as they floated there, Nagato noticed that floating in the center of them all was a glowing pair of orbs. Reaching out, he lifted them up. Looking at them, he knew they must be Hamada's. Back on the surface, Toneri felt the sudden stop of the moon's trajectory as it began to once more even out. He then knew what must have happened. "What have you done?" "Fulfilled Hamada's will," Nagato said as he rose to the surface. "I have something to show you." He reached out with his hands and offered Toneri Hamada's Ten Saigon. "Learn to see the world the way that Hamada did," he said. Toneri took the Ten Saigon and for a moment went silent as his consciousness was taken elsewhere. When he returned, he fell to his knees. I thought I was doing Hamada's will." Nagato knelt down. "Toneri, I want you to know something. I know we are the most recent Sages of Six Paths, but we are not Hagoromo or Hamada. We're Nagato and Toneri, and we must act according to what we believe is right, not what our ancestors might have believed. We must choose to do what's right. And what do you think is right?" Toneri then looked out toward the earth. I want to protect that." Nagato hugged Toneri. "Then protect it. I will do the same. That's what we were destined to do." From there, the battle ended, and Toneri came to admit that he was wrong in destroying the Earth. As the moon settled back into place, the world sighed a sigh of relief. Naruto, Nagato, and Karin would return to their home in Konoha, where they would spend the night looking up at the moon, its normal size having returned. Nagato looked up at the moon solemnly and spoke. "I wonder if there's a world out there where I tried to do the same thing as Toneri, where I tried to destroy the Earth instead of protecting it." Naruto and Karin offered him a hug. "If there is, I'm sure your kind heart stopped it before you did it. You're a kind person, Nagato. Never forget that." Not long after, school began again. Naruto, Karin, and Nagato would all return to a hero's welcome. They ended up becoming the popular kids, which honestly got old quickly. Karin couldn't wait for the fad that was admiration by the students to end, which it eventually did. But as she sat there with her brother and cousin, she couldn't help but think that maybe they'd been placed there for a reason. Their mothers had been pulled apart by fate. Naruto, Karin, and Nagato had all suffered in their own ways. But despite everything, it had all worked out for the best. As they continued school together, Karin began to look at Naruto and Nagato and crave the next big step in their lives, their careers as shinobi, a day that couldn't come soon enough. And that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Despite its ending though, I feel that it's safe to leave it open for future installments should you all like it enough. If so, be sure to like, comment, and share to tell us that you liked it. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified should we ever decide to make a sequel series. And while you're at it, check out these other videos as well. I bet you'll enjoy them. Anyway, until next time, peace out.